playing music in a band format when I was probably about 15 years old. And I'm 60 now, so mathematically that was 45 years ago. And that would have been in the mid 70s. And so a lot of my influences tend to be based around that time frame. And those bands, I guess the bands of note from then, the biggest one would be Ozone / The Ones, which were playing 1976, 77, 78, 79. That band did a 45 that didn't really gather or garner a lot of attention at the time, but has since kind of turned into a sought after, hard to find record. After that, in the very early 80s, I was in a band called the Dominoes. That would be 81, 82, get into the 83, 84, 85 time frame. I had my own band, the Clancy Carroll Band, and then 3 on Fire, which was, like I said, probably the most popular or most renowned band. It was kind of a 1988 through 1992 kind of thing. And then I had a band called C Squared in maybe the 93 to 95 range. And that was kind of the end of my, working band focused activity at that time, in that time frame. Very naturally or very organically, if you will. The other individuals that I played with in 3 on Fire would be Fred Fisher on bass and Bill Stace on drums. I play guitar and sing. Fred sings. We all sang. We were kind of a power trio, if you will. Kind of some strange cross between kind of 70s hard rock and punk, if you will. So that was kind of the cross thing that was going on there. How did I meet those guys? I had known Bill because he played in bands that I was familiar with and knew him generally just from hanging around nightclubs, seeing bands, that sort of thing. Bill was doing some work with Fred already, and that's how I met Fred, although he had been in bands as well. It's Milwaukee. At that time, the music scene that I was associated with was, relatively small. There were a handful of clubs where like-minded bands played, and so you kind of got to know everybody. I don't think that's all that different than now. Just hanging around nightclubs, seeing bands and, some facial recognition perhaps too, as well as like, hey, I've seen that guy around. Who is that? So again, big city, small city thing where, depending on what you like, and I think this is applicable to not just being in bands and playing music, but the arts and film and all sorts of different things where people run in the same circles and you get to know people along the way. In our case, it's pretty straightforward, pretty organic. There was a pretty small number of places to play, whether they be nightclubs, whether they be larger concert venues, whether they be some very small bar type things. There were maybe 6 or 8 or 10 different places that bands like us could play, and most often you would just talk to the owner of the establishment, or if they had a person that was booking the shows, you talk to them and say, hey, can we do a show? And most likely, you get your foot in the door. Depending on other things, as you kind of evolve as a band and release material and kind of develop into something larger, your name gets around, and then you might have a contact through some other band that you're friends with, or if somebody's taking a liking to you, they might be acting as a booking agent for you. Some people, if you take it seriously enough and you become, an operating, functioning band, that's your livelihood. Yeah, you're going to need a manager. You're going to need somebody to book your shows for you. We did most of that ourselves. In fact, Bill Stace was kind of actively probably the most busy person in the band that would pick up the phone, call somebody in Green Bay, call somebody in Madison, be connected through another band. Bill did sound for bands. Bill toured with De Kreutzen, who's a big band in Milwaukee in the 80s, and made a lot of contacts that way. We got shows in Cincinnati, shows in Minneapolis, based on his connections, having worked on the road. So it's just kind of having conversations and making friends along the way, and that's how we did it. How did your band start getting traction? Again, it was pretty slow. We were fortunate in that all three of us, I listed my previous bands before, and while none of them were wildly successful, I had enough of a name. Fred had played in bands and had enough of a name. Bill had played in bands and had enough of a name. We were all involved in other aspects as well. Fred is a photographer and did photos for other bands. I had written for local press, local music press. Bill had a recording studio. So, beyond the fact that many people knew many other people, we just had a lot of connections. And so when we started doing our first shows, naturally, friends would come and see you, people would come and see you, and, you kind of build from there. We very early on did some recording. Back in that time frame, there was no, digital distribution of music. So it was good old, recording studio, dump to cassette, make copies and get them to people. And, getting traction, it's just kind of a natural thing. If you're good enough that some people want to come and see you, if you're smart enough or have enough of a work ethic to play shows and hopefully build things into bigger things, you get better shows, you start opening for other touring acts or national acts, and you kind of get to the point where people start to take notice. Local radio's very important. Local press is very important, and you kind of build on that to kind of get that traction and move things forward, and hopefully kind of take one step at a time. At least that's been my experience. Success is can be measured different ways, right? We existed in kind of what I'd call the pre-alternative rock period of time, the pre-indie period. So were we ever signed and released, full-length records and toured the whole country? No, unfortunately. Were we successful? I think on sort of a local, regional level, yes. What was the most important thing to our success as a group? I think we, for better or worse, we stuck to our own vision. Where we reside, Milwaukee, is kind of like a lot of places that are pretty isolated. You're pretty far from the spotlight that used to be the case with the coasts, New York, Los Angeles, that, like other scenes, Cleveland and Minneapolis, things like that, you're allowed to develop as you wish and do pretty much whatever you want, So there was never anybody, looking over our shoulder saying, hey, don't do that, do this, because we want you to, sell more records. We just didn't really have that kind of pressure. So, sticking to our own vision of the kind of music we wanted to play and how we wanted to present ourselves was I think, kind of key to our success and our satisfaction as individuals playing music. Local scenes are important, but they can be a double-edged kind of sword situation, I think. It is important for individuals as musicians or any kind of artist to develop their talent and to be able to have an audience, whatever that means, and develop contacts with people in order to grow. Eventually, though, you need to find a way to kind of break through that if that's what you want to do. And that kind of gets really at the core. I think there's a question here. Maybe not a direct question, but the whole thing about being a band to me is why you want to do it. And everybody's different. And it ranges everything from I just want to hang out with some friends and meet people. If you're a guy, meet girls. If you're a girl, meet guys, or whatever the case might be. Have a few beers and play for some friends, and it's great. Other people are artistically, creatively driven and just have to scratch that itch. Other people, want to make it to some really high level and have that be their life and their income. So it kind of depends on your own goals, and why you're doing it is very important as to what kind of steps you might take and how you measure your own success and gain satisfaction from it. So a local scene is important because it helps you build that. It's a good acid test around being able to see if kind of what you're doing, is any good or not, if people like it or not. And that's kind of how I see the local scene. I think accessibility is kind of the big thing, which means that you go back far enough. You go back into when I started playing, and there was like no way that some little band that's rehearsing in a basement or just trying to get their thing going was, for example, going to get on the radio. I mean, that just didn't happen, And like I said before, there was no digital media, so you couldn't put something on Bandcamp. You couldn't put something on YouTube or whatever the medium might be and get it out there and have people actually see it. You actually had to make records. And for new bands, I mean, that was kind of an expensive, challenging process at that point in time, it was very difficult, What's changed is it's less difficult, whether you're in school or whether you're somebody who's creating on their own, in their own home studio, or whether you're kind of following, more of a traditional, record, play, get gigs, kind of build a following kind of thing. That's really what's changed. I think in many ways it's better. In many ways, accessibility has increased so that if you're doing something, people have an opportunity to see it or hear it. The downside of that, of course, is there's a lot of people doing things. So, kind of, again, goes back to what you're looking for being in a band, I think it's great. Again, it depends, I think that there's a lot of talent. I think there's always been a lot of talent in Milwaukee. I think that there's a lot more, there are many more avenues for things to be seen and heard. So I think depending on your focus and your energy, there's a lot of possibilities. I think there's a lot of, it's difficult to define a Milwaukee music scene because I think it's made up of a lot of smaller scenes. There's kind of a pop scene and there's a punk rock scene and, there's hip hop artists and all sorts of people and, there's overlaps between those. I just think there's a lot of talent and there's a lot of ability for people to, be recognized and get their stuff out there. I think the local press is good. I think local radio is very good. There's people listening. And I think that there's also probably, if you want to go that route, there's probably ways to kind of tap into more of like a, management kind of thing if that's the route that you want to go with your music and be able to kind of keep that ball rolling and build upon that. There's some artists in Milwaukee that, are on the verge of, potentially becoming really big, whatever that means these days, right? How much musical talent does someone need to have to be in a band? That's a good question. All depends, you know. If you want to be somebody at home working on your computer, or you just want to be in kind of like a, really indie bare bones kind of punk rock band, you don't necessarily need a lot of talent. I think you need to be creative. You need to be motivated. You don't need to be the best drummer or guitar player or singer in the world. But for other types of things, the cream always kind of rises, right? So whether you're writing or, whether you're like some really great, keyboard player, or drummer, it all depends on the genre. So, I kind of like it all. I can appreciate somebody that just picked up a guitar 6 months ago and knows like 4 chords and is out knocking it out just as much as somebody who's, been really plying their trade or working their instrument for a long period of time. So it's kind of everything's permitted at this point in time, and I think that's good. I have my own personal taste, but it's a big world out there. So there's a lot of opportunity. What advice do you have for newly formed bands? Do it because you love it. Do it because you feel like you have to do it, as opposed to maybe seeing it as some sort of career thing. And that's just my opinion. The music biz, and this is not necessarily myself firsthand, but having friends, knowing people that do it for a living it's a tough gig, over the long haul. So I guess it's like life, you should do the thing you love, and if that's what you love, then you should pursue it. Having fun's good too, right? So if you can have fun doing it, that's a good thing. I've moved more towards, I run a record label / publishing entity. So off and on over the course of the last 20 years, put out records, put out books, put out releases by contemporary artists or historical kind of artifacts from Milwaukee's musical past. I do play, I do write. I'm in the process of putting together a band, and that's been kind of a thing for the last year. After a while, it stopped being fun, and since it wasn't my bread-winning career, I took a break because I didn't want to do it, and I've kind of gotten the interest back again, and so trying to follow that muse. I'm working on getting something going at this point in time. So kind of went in remission, but never really went away, and applied myself to other things along the way. Like I said, I've done writing, music press, that sort of thing. So it's always been there. It's just which avenue I've kind of chosen to pursue.